Hey guys, it's Bang for Buck PC Gamer here, and I want to talk a little bit about resolution today. And generally, is 4K worth it? I've been gaming at 4K for a while now, and I feel I'm in a position where I can actually make a judgment call. A lot of us who are PC gamers still generally game at 1080p, and let's be under no illusion that is still the most common resolution used. But when we want to upgrade, there is a choice to make, and it's either 2K or 4K, but both come with pros and cons. So let's jump into the pros of gaming at 2K. Gaming at 2K, you can take advantage of resolutions up to 144 hertz, I believe, and it's going to cost you a lot of money, but it's going to offer you that silky smooth frame rate. And in games such as, let's just say, CSGO, when you have that extra high smooth refresh rate, it can help with your aim and it can give you the advantage. So I do see the appeal, but they are really expensive. A general decent 2560 by 1440 monitor would cost you in the UK just under £300. So you're looking at about that much money. Another pro of being a 2K gamer is that you can get away with running a single high-end GPU, either the Fury X from the AMD, which is their currently flagship single GPU, or the GTX 980 Ti, or the Titan X, if you really want to invest up to £1,000 in a high-end GPU. But for most of us, the GTX 980 Ti is probably the way to go if you're going to go with an Nvidia single card solution. Anyway, moving on to the pros of 4K, obviously, is just generally the resolution itself. You're gaming with 3840 by 2160 lines of resolution, so that gives you an amazing amount of detail. And prices are not as expensive as you'd think. You can get them for about £300, starting at 300 up to the very high end £800. I personally went with something in between, Samsung U28D 59D. That cost me just under £400. Offers a 1 millisecond response rate and has 60 frames and 60 hertz over DisplayPort. So great color. It works fantastically well, and I would recommend it to anyone. So moving on, the cons of gaming at 4K is you are generally going to need two of these each, depending on which way you go. So you're going to need to invest into about £1,000 of GPU horsepower if you intend on gaming at 4K at ultra settings. You could probably get away with gaming at 4K with one of these cards if you wanted to compromise on the visual quality. Again though, with 2K, to take advantage of these high refresh rates like 140 hertz or 120 hertz, one high-end GPU from AMD or Nvidia, it's not really going to cut it into the most demanding games. You are still going to need two. So it's a choice you're going to have to make. And I'm just going to do a comparison really, just to show you what kind of refresh rate and what kind of performance you can get from running two GTX 980 Ti's with games at ultra settings, and the compromises you'll need to make to try and maintain 60 frames per second. One of the biggest concerns for people that want to go 4K is that it's not worth it because of the price and because you won't be able to game at ultra settings. But I don't believe that's true. I believe if you remove anti-aliasing from the equation, and for those of you who don't know, that's a technique that generally minimizes that jagged effect around the edges of our games. But when you increase resolutions up to 3840 by 2160, that becomes less and less apparent. And adding anti-aliasing at a 4K resolution, in my opinion, really is counterproductive. It takes way too much performance and a very little increase in visual quality. So I believe gaming at 4K minus anti-aliasing at ultra settings is something that can be done with the current hardware today, at as close to 60 frames per second or even above, depending on the title. So running Crysis 3 at 2K, the in-game settings I used were a resolution of 2560 by 1440. Anti-aliasing was set to 2 times MSAA. I feel that no one really uses heavy amounts of anti-aliasing at 1440p. And everything else was set to very high. Motion blur I always disable because, let's face it, it looks terrible. So, and it doesn't really have any bearing on performance. So generally, performance scaling for the CryEngine 3 is amazing, which I have to give credit to the CryEngine for. And the performance that you get from running at 1440p with 2 GTX 980 Ti's in SLI is pretty impressive. If you are someone that has a high refresh rate monitor, you're definitely going to see the benefits here, because we're averaging between 90 and 110 frames per second, so it's very good to see. And I chose this specific area because it has a lot of everything. It has water, it has a lot of NPCs, very high amounts of vegetation, which we know does kill performance off. And the GTX 980 Ti just cutting through it like it's nothing. So if you are someone that was planning on getting a dual GPU setup for a high refresh rate 1440p experience, then I'll definitely recommend 2 GTX 980 Ti's in SLI. Also, the game still does look fantastic, and the reason I chose Crysis 3 again is just because it's renowned to being one of the most demanding games on the market. Even today, there's games that don't touch it when it comes to the amount of GPU power that's necessary to get this game to run at a decent refresh rate. So this is basically me creating a worst case scenario for people who plan on going 2K or 4K with this kind of graphics card setup. So Crysis 3 at 4K. In-game settings that I used were 3840 by 2160. Anti-aliasing is disabled, and everything else is at very high. Looking at the system spec in more detail, you can see the only thing that is disabled is motion blur. So we're not really compromising in any way on the quality of the game. The reason I chose Crysis 3 is because it's renowned to be one of the most demanding PC games of all time, especially at 4K. So just to give you a worst case scenario of what 4K gaming would be like, this is definitely one of the games to go for. So looking at the frame rate, it's looking pretty decent at the moment, averaging between the 55 and 60 frames per second, I would say. And VRAM usage as well is well in check, just under 4 gigabytes, which is good to see. And I'm getting a very good smooth experience. I do want to point out that I am losing 4 to 5 frames per second just by recording at 4K. At lower resolutions, the performance hit is barely noticeable, maybe 1 or 2 frames per second. So the times you're seeing the game dip to 55, it would really be at 58 or 59. So I have to say, Crysis 3, very high settings with no anti-aliasing. You can barely see any jagged edges. I believe that anti-aliasing is pretty much useless at this resolution. In some games it is a bit more apparent than others, the jagged lines, but Crysis 3 is definitely not one of them. Adding anti-aliasing would just be a resource hog, and it would cut your frames per second unnecessarily, and it would basically, it wouldn't make a tangible difference to visual quality. So definitely would advise you to leave anti-aliasing off. It would be the only compromise you would be making, and the performance is pretty amazing. And I have to say, it looks fantastic at 4K. I can't explain it, you'd have to see it for yourself, but definitely an amazing experience. So The Witcher 3 at 2K, I'm using a resolution of 2560 by 1440. I'm using Nvidia Hairworks enabled and anti-aliasing set to 2 times. Everything else is at the maximum settings you can choose. Moving on to post-processing, motion blur again disabled, but anti-aliasing is enabled this time. Sharpening I leave at low because it is just a filter and it doesn't affect performance, it's just a personal preference for myself. Now The Witcher 3 again, I chose it because it is one of the most demanding games around. So creating a worst case scenario of what 2K and 4K scaling would be with GTX 980 Ti's. And as you can see, we're averaging between 70 and 80 frames per second, so you're in no danger of keeping a 60 frames per second frame rate. You're in no danger of going below that. But if you've got a high refresh rate monitor, you're not really going to be taking advantage of that 120 Hz or 144 Hz refresh rate. So even though the monitor has the capability, we still do not have the power to drive frames that high presently with the current GPUs we've got. So walking amongst a few NPCs, we can see, we're still averaging with 70 frames per second, 70 to 80, so great performance. The game still does look pretty stunning at 2K, I have to say, and AX doesn't seem to be slowing anything down, which is always good to see. Even though we've reduced the anti-aliasing around the hair, it still looks pretty smooth and realistic, not too jaggy. And performance is just overall really good. You're definitely going to get a great experience from gaming at 1440p with a pair of two GTX 980 Ti's, but it does not look anywhere near as good as 4K and up. And when you play The Witcher 3 in particular at 4K, you'll know what I'm talking about. So for people who play RPGs, I think 4K is definitely going to be a bit more beneficial than a higher refresh rate. So moving on to The Witcher 3 at 4K, I'm using settings of 3840 by 2160 on the resolution. Hairworks is enabled, and I disabled Hairworks' anti-aliasing, so I've reduced it to 0. Everything else is set to the highest you can. So pretty much the only compromise I'm making in this game is again anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing disabled, and everything else set to maximum. Sharpening is just a filter. Personal preference, doesn't affect performance at all. I prefer it on low than high, but everything else is at maxed out. And as you can see, The Witcher 3 definitely, in my opinion, the most demanding game of 2015. It takes a ridiculous amount of performance to get this game to run at a high refresh rate once everything's enabled. And at 4K, you're asking a very high order to maintain 60 frames per second. But the GTX 980 Ti in SLI is doing a great job. So I'm just going to run around the countryside here and just take in all the atmosphere and all the vegetation, the sun, shadows. And you'll be averaging around 50 to 60 frames per second. Bear in mind, as I said again, recording at 4K, you do lose 4 to 5 frames per second. That's the performance hit I'm experiencing. So I'm going to walk amongst a few NPCs now just to see what kind of performance I get once I'm amongst people. And you can expect drops to 49, lows of about 45 frames per second. But apart from that, generally you will be averaging 50 to 55 frames per second with The Witcher 3 at 4K. So first of all, I just have to say this game is absolutely gorgeous at 4K. Best looking game I've played to date, without a shadow of a doubt. It just brings the game to life, basically. You can see details that you never see below 4K. You can see each individual threading in Geralt's hilt of his sword. I could go on for a long time, but I completed this game at 1080p, and to play it at 4K again just makes me want to play through the whole game from the start. That's how much of a difference. It feels like a different game. Okay, so I just want to summarize now. So 4K, is it worth it? Well, in my opinion, it all depends what kind of gamer you are. If you're let's just say a competitive gamer, plays a lot of CSGO and things like that, then you probably want to go for the 2K higher refresh rate route. If you play a lot of first person shooters, that would probably suit you a bit more. But if you're someone who enjoys RPG games and racing games, then 60 frames per second is going to be enough, and with the added detail, you're definitely going to get a better experience. So when you're looking at cost, you're still going to need to invest in probably a dual GPU solution to take advantage of 2K screens with high refresh rates. For example, you're going to need to spend around £300 on a 2560 by 1440 monitor with a refresh rate of up to 144 Hertz, and definitely one GTX 980 Ti or one AMD Fury X is not going to be able to do the job. So I would suggest you have to look at the games that you want to play. But from someone who's been playing at 4K for a few months now, I would tell you that it certainly brings games to a completely different level of visual quality. And as you can see, I just took two of the most demanding games on the market, and the only compromise I made was reducing anti-aliasing, which in my opinion is really not necessary at that resolution anyway. So you're still going to get a high refresh rate at the very, very high settings that the game can offer. So it really comes down to the games you play at the end of the day. I play a bit of everything myself. Not really much of a competitive gamer, so you won't really see me playing CSGO or something like that online. But the price is going to be pretty similar. A little bit more if you're going to buy a 4K monitor, but like I said, a good 2K monitor is going to cost you a lot of money as well. So it really comes down to what you like. But in my opinion, for people who say 4K isn't worth it with the current graphics cards we have available today, I would say you don't know what you're talking about, and in my opinion you probably haven't even played at 4K yet. So that's my thoughts and that's my opinion, and I would definitely like you guys to share with me yours. So just get in that comment section and let me know what you think. And again, thanks for watching, guys.